What is something looking back you say, well, I wish I had blah, blah, blah?
I wished I had God in the midst of it. And what I realize is that we can't do this without the Lord.
Welcome to another episode of Live the Grace Life. I am your host, Corey Holman, and today we have a special edition on our podcast where we talk about business, we talk about leadership, and we talk about life. And today we're going to focus on the life aspect. I have today a guest, special guest, which happened to be my parents. They've been married for 42 years, and today we want to highlight their story on this episode. So make sure you tune in, make sure you like, make sure you share this podcast, because I promise you this is going to add value to your life. So please help me welcome my parents, Larry and Sherry Holman.
It's good to be here.
Yes, it is. Good to
All
be here.
right. So we're going to dive in. One of the things that we did years ago as their 25th anniversary, we did a video kind of highlighting their story. You all kind of shared about, how you all met and just how life has evolved over 25 years. Well, we wanted to update that video, and that's almost 20 years ago, almost, and they've reached that 42 milestone. And so today we're going to be highlighting their story even more. So I want to ask you this question. 42 years ago, probably a little bit longer, because you took some time to date. What drew you all together?
Ladies first.
So I think it was, us. We grew up together. Our mothers, they were friends. As we said in the previous podcast, they worked together in the fields together. And our families were very close. And when we were younger, it was always being said that Larry and Sherry, that, putting us together, as boyfriend and girlfriend.
Get it right now. It was Larry and Mama Dia.
Oh, she had, and in background, y'all, to this, for those who grew up in the country, they have nicknames.
Yeah. And so, but my husband's mom died when he was 9 years of age, and they moved away. But he and I always stayed in touch. And when we reached a certain age, because we would talk back and forth on the phone when we were teenagers, but one day he said, "Why don't you come up here?" And I did. And I went up there in August of 1983, and we were married January 1994.
84.
1984, yes.
And so when you're saying up there, that was in
Hagerstown, Maryland at that time. And we've just always had this connection together.
Yeah.
What about from the male's perspective there?
What brought us together? I think more than anything, it was that connection to home. When I moved to Maryland, I left everything. That was my home, and it was a whole different world in Maryland. For one, we thought that my wife's family was rich, but we were poor. They had a house with I don't know, I guess all the stuff in it. Our house was, if you sat in a chair inside of the house and faced a wall, you could see the outside, because, we grew up in a farming community. And this was in the late 60s. Yeah, late 60s. So, it was, when I moved to Maryland, it was like moving to a huge city. The only people that I knew were my immediate family, um, and her family basically, and then people from school when I lived in Georgia. But when I moved to Maryland, there was different. It was a culture shock for me because in my first class, I was the only African American in the class. And needless to say, and in my community, it was the same as the classroom. Even though my community was mostly African American, if I opened my mouth, it just people just started laughing. They made fun of me because I had that deep Southern drawl. So I learned to keep my mouth shut. I was quiet, and people thought I was shy, but I was just trying to avoid any kind of controversy. But that kind of shaped my worldview, as far as it goes with relationships. So I didn't really seek to have a relationship like that up there because of my personality. I withdrew. And consequently, because we would almost every year or every other year or something like that, our guardians, which was my older brother and his wife, they would, bring us back home, for family reunions and stuff like that. And we just always saw each other and talked to each other, because it was almost as though we were family.
Yeah.
So it's like there was a connection there that lasted. And eventually, it just grew in my frame of mind. It grew into a thought that, basically this was my destiny. She was going to be my wife. I never said it. I never said anything to her, but it just kind of stuck with me. So I hope that answered the question.
It does. So I think one of the things that is interesting about this story, and Mom kind of talked about this, was even as children, they were always paired together.
Yes.
Larry and Mama Dear, that type of thing, and it was more of a joke in the household.
was.
That's the way y'all shared it. And now it wasn't a joke; it was more prophecy, really.
Yeah.
It became a reality.
Yeah. So was that more your side or both side that kind of did that?
It was probably my side. I grew up with a lot of brothers, and they were always poking fun, and talking about it. And, it's just that they kind of spoke it into existence, really, because they always talked about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, they kind of helped us along the way.
Yeah.
So there's more to this story. So like things kind of evolved. You moved to Maryland. Y'all still kept in contact, and things kind of happened during high school. You want to kind of dive into that about? Go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, that's when our communication intensified, and I don't know. I guess in my frame of mind, I mean, she was my girl, and that was that. So, on one particular phone call, she mentioned that, she was going to be going out, with some friends. And I think she might have mentioned her cousin, who happened to be a male, so that didn't sit right with me, so it was I guess it was approaching a weekend. And this was after I had graduated. This was, obviously after I had graduated. And I got off work Friday, got my paycheck cashed, hopped in the car, and I was going down there to see what was going on. So I basically drove, 14 hours, didn't pack a suitcase, toothbrush, none of that stuff. I just took my paycheck, filled up the car, and headed to Georgia. And when I got there, the far closer I got, the more silly I knew what I was doing was,
And it was the next day.
But, nevertheless, I followed through, and, we just kind of, spent some time together, and that was the beginning of it. I think once I did that, it kind of made her realize that there was something serious about, the way I felt about her. Even though we had been talking for a while. So
So this was the late 70s, right? That would have been the late 70s if you're 18.
It would have been probably late 70s, and because I think I had graduated high school by this point.
So you
No, 78. I think
78,
I
okay.
think it was like 78. Because you had graduated, and I think I had maybe one more year.
you're 1 year after.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't recall the days like that.
Okay. So basically, Dad got a little jealous. Let's just be real. Let's call it what it is, and that's always a funny story. But to think in his mind, he's coming down to see what's going on. But whatever had happened, if it was gonna happen, it had already happened. Because 14 hours later, you weren't gonna arrive.
Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is, I was just making sure that I marked my territory.
Understood.
Basically, anybody down there knew that this was my girl. So.
Now, what were you driving though?
Ooh, it was a two-door Ford. Gosh, what was that? Was it a GTO? I think it was a GTO. I'm not a car guy, so I don't.
I never asked you that. I was just curious about what it was. Yeah, because it's just interesting thinking in the 70s, you driving down. That's a different time, but that I'm not even aware of. So let's talk about this. So over the years, how has your relationship evolved over the decades? That's 4 decades that things have kind of evolved.
Oh, a lot has happened.
Yeah.
I think that over the years, we learned so much because initially our lives were not in Christ. Our relationship wasn't driven by, studying the Word and meditating the Word and using God's Word to guide us.
Or living the Word.
Living the Word. So, but as we started to dive into that Word, we learned about a covenant. We learned about the covenant of God and the covenant of marriage. And we began to apply those principles to our lives. And our love got even more stronger. We got more committed to our relationship with each other. We began to pray together. We use those principles to raise our kids. But most importantly, it was our love walk together. It was I can say truly we experienced where the two really began to become one. We became one and unified in our efforts and the things that we did. It was less frustrating, because we were doing things together.
I think I would add to it that going back to my whole Maryland experience, I guess my brother had us, into different churches and religious experiences. I know at one point he had us, go to Jehovah's Witnesses, and then he would have us do, I think, the Assembly of God, where they picked us up on buses, and we go. And, it kind of, Jehovah's Witnesses didn't stick, but Christianity, it was a beginning for me. Now, don't get me wrong. I was a kid, so it didn't really form my thoughts the way it should have at that point. But I think I had this whole idea of what a family should be like. And believe it or not, I got that idea from watching the Brady Bunch. So that was my that's the way I formed my thoughts about family. That and witnessing my best friend's family. His mom, his dad, all of his family was in one house. And they were a functioning real family. Where in our house it was me and my siblings in my oldest brother's house with his wife and kids. So it's like we were stepchildren.
Yeah.
So it was different. But I saw what I wanted, and watching the Brady Bunch and watching the McRae family. And, that's where I formed my view of what family should be like. Now, like Sherry said earlier, I wasn't really focused on the Christian aspect of it or my relationship with God. I did some stuff that I know that I shouldn't do, looking back on it. But as we became, when we decided to get married, I knew enough to know that I had to go talk to a preacher, and he came to my apartment and he married us in my apartment, with my siblings as witnesses, and it was, from that point on, our walk started to develop. It didn't really intensify until we moved back to Georgia, though.
Yes. And by this point, we were married 10 years.
Yeah, yeah. Even though we were in a relationship with God, it was not as strong as we wanted it to be, as I wanted it to be. If I'm looking back, I would say that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So things evolve over 40 years. And you kind of talked about how faith kind of plays a role in your marriage. And so as things kind of progressed, you all kind of did marriage ministry at different places, trying to help coach other young couples during that time. What are some advice you would give to younger couples kind of looking back, and just be as honest and transparent, because those who tune in, you just never know where they are in the stage, whether it's an entrepreneur that's married, whether it's just someone tuning in that just saw this and was just like, I'm intrigued by this story. What is something looking back you say, well, I wish I had blah, blah, blah?
I wished I had God in the midst of it. And what I realize is that we can't do this without the Lord in our lives. We can't do it without seeking Him. We need Him in every area of our life. I think that we probably would have eliminated a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, if we just had God in the midst of our relationship. And and one other thing that I learned too is that talking about the covenant. And what I didn't know in the first 10 years of our marriage, how important it is for the male to for that sexual relationship with the male.
Come on now.
It is so important to them, and making the time, because we're busy. I worked a full-time job and I had kids, but making that time to spend that time with my mate and making sure that my mate was, satisfied in that area. I just didn't know how important that was for the male or for my husband.
That's real. I think that's something that a lot of young couples, as they're going through their process in different stages, that they have to realize as a part of it. That's a part of the covenant. That's a part of what the Bible instructs us to do. It's kind of like, I think one of the things that people don't realize is intimacy in a relationship is so important, just as intimacy is as your relationship with God. And I think part of that, when you think about how we say that the marriage is a picture of how Christ loved the church, right? And there's intimacy between the Father and the Son and us as its body. And so us being married, that intimacy that we have with our relationship with the Father is the same thing that keeps us glued in the intimacy in a earthly relationship. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of parallel, if you will, in seeing why that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just to give my point of view on the question that you asked. Okay, if I was talking to a younger couple getting started, mm-hmm. my focus would be take your eyes off of what you see in the world, because you know you see a lot of stuff that is, you got to be this big he-man, and you got to be the man of the house, and all these things that kind of puts you at odds, with your wife and the relationship with your wife, because you're coming in here with this hammer trying to, beat things into shape, but it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. So I would encourage them to put the focus on building their relationship with God. Focus your attention on your relationship with Jesus. And as Jesus grow you and you grow in that relationship and the knowledge of God, then, like the word says, all these things will be added to you. But it'll show you, by developing that relationship with God, it'll show you that, the covenant is important, the relationship is important, and the way you carry yourself in that marriage is important. And the more you pattern yourself after Christ, the more you learn to, to enjoy your life and enjoy your mate, because if you're caught up in all that other stuff, it distracts you from who God wants you to be, number one, and it confuses you. It makes you think thoughts that you shouldn't even be thinking. Your focus should be, building your relationship with God, which in turn will help you build your relationship with your wife and your children, and also building, protecting your family, taking care of your family, as far as providing for them, and all of that comes as you develop your relationship with Jesus. The word just begins to take root in your heart, and you start walking in that direction. And as you walk in that direction, all those things that we're talking about, kind of becomes more of a focus for you, and that's what I would do, because I mean, like I said, when I was growing up, if I was in a relationship with Christ, I don't know if we would have even, got together, because I probably wouldn't have jumped in that car, and drove down there, because I was in the flesh when I did that.
Yeah.
If I had been in the spirit, we'd have got together, because we would have talked, But that would be my thing, focus your relationship and your attention on developing that relationship and keeping it strong, with Christ. And then, everything else around you becomes easier, and becomes better for everybody involved. Yeah.
And I also like to add too that our words matter, and especially as a woman, as we are communicating with our with our spouses, our words and the way that we say and to use our words are important. Mm-hmm. Our words should be used to encourage, to build up, and to never tear down, because it's something about when you speak those words of encouragement, it draws your husband closer to you and not, propel him and send him in another direction. So the words that we speak and even the volume in which we speak our words are very, very important.
That was a hard lesson, but and I'm still learning that lesson. Even after all these years.
I'm
much better.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, we both are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the words that we speak to each other are really, really important.
Mm. That's really good advice, and I think especially I was going to go down a path, but I want to hone in on something you said about the tone, and the way we speak life, right? And I'm gonna get to what Dad said too. But I think one of the things is that we have to treat each other almost like soil, almost like a plant, right? And so when you go out and you have a plant and you're watering and you're fertilizing that particular plant, is what you put in it, is what you surround it with that causes it to grow. And one of the things that I'm going to say females have a great responsibility is in her words to speak life, right? Like you said, to encourage and to not speak against. Because what happens is if we're not careful, you can fight against the very thing God assigned to you. And that's vice versa. So don't think it's just women saying and men too. It's both roles. You
Goes
both
both
have to
ways.
speak life. But I think the part of what I'm trying to hone in is that you're not against each other.
Right.
We're not enemies. And one of the things that the enemy wants to do is to make you feel like that's your enemy.
Yes.
But you are not. And when the alignment comes to basically what you're saying is realizing my words and the things and the way I say things either add value or tear down. Because one thing that most people don't realize is men do have an ego, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The ego is not necessarily a bad thing, but the male ego needs if the partner is around them, they have to speak life.
Yes.
The littlest thing can throw them off.
And that's what I learned.
Yeah, it's the littlest thing, and because you are the closest individual to that person, they're expecting you to speak life, especially when the world is already tearing them down. The other aspect I love that Dad said from his perspective was kind of honing in on that relationship aspect, making sure that you're honing in on your relationship with God, and return that adds value to your relationship with your spouse. So those were really good things. But I want to ask a question on, you all grew up in a different era, right? So things have started to shift, and the way people view marriage, view relationships have kind of shifted now. They think how roles in terms of responsibilities. They think about all these other things that they try to add to marriage. And to be honest with you, it's not really working. I think we're starting to see the fruit of this not really working. What would you say to this new generation that is almost shifted the way marriage is? I'm still talking about men and women. That's what I'm talking about. But I'm just saying how they may view their roles and responsibilities, that type of thing.
Well, I think that, back to what I was saying about, as you build your relationship with Christ, you're doing that through studying the Word. Once you study the Word, you're applying that Word to your life. The way you behave, the way you handle your responsibilities, all of that. The more you focus your relationship on Christ, the more developed you become in all aspects of your life. Yeah. So when you talk about the differences now, things are different, but marriage, God bless you, marriage is still a covenant. That didn't change, and it won't change. That's a gift from God, and we hold that, dear, because it's so important. But now, as far as the roles and role reversal and all that, there's still the husband, there's still the wife. Now, the husband may be at home, washing dishes, taking care of the kids. Nothing wrong with that. If the wife has, a higher degree and is able to focus, on getting, a six-figure salary or what have you, I don't see that as an issue. I don't see that as a problem, as long as we don't forget, that, God established order in the household, and we have to maintain that aspect of it. When it comes to paying bills or all that stuff, it doesn't necessarily have to be the male taking care of all those things. The one who does it best, in my view, is the one that should do it, because you don't want to be out on the street because your ego is saying, I handle this, but you don't handle it, So as far as that goes, I I, the root of the matter is that the word is what determines, how we operate in a marriage relationship. It should,
Yeah.
you know, and as long as you're checking the boxes as far as that goes, as it relates to the marriage being a covenant, and you're fulfilling your roles as the Bible basically tells you to. All those other little intricate parts of relationship and marriage, that's just us working together.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So that's the way I look at it.
Yes. And I 100% agree with that.
Imagine turning your business into a brand people can't stop talking about. Marketing that matters. The Entrepreneur's Guide to Growth and Success by Corey Holman. It's your blueprint for building unstoppable momentum. This book is packed with innovative ideas, action steps, and game-changing insights that you can use right now. Are you ready to disrupt your industry? Don't wait. Grab your copy now on Amazon and start dominating your market today.
Yeah.
I think that was really good. I think what Dad said was so good is that whoever does it better
Best.
or best.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's realizing you are a team.
Yes.
And, go ahead.
And I want to make sure I missed this part of it. Whoever does it best is the one that I think should do it. But it's all about communicating and being in agreement. I mean, that's really
That's the
important.
key.
In other words, if I'm the best at it, I don't just jump out and do it.
Yeah.
It has to fall within the constraints of the marriage. And the covenant. You don't I don't want to speak. I don't know. There's a
Communication aspect.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, God, made the man the head of the marriage.
Absolutely.
You don't discount that. And as a man, you don't flaunt that.
Yeah.
You communicate and you work together and you keep things organized that way. But if my wife is better at paying the bills, which she is, well, she has her way of doing it. Let me put it that way.
I have done an excellent job.
She has done an excellent job. And incidentally, two weeks after we got married, I turned it over to her, and she's had it ever since.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, it's not an issue. I thank God for the wisdom to do that, because it took a lot of pressure off of me working some of the jobs and the careers that I've had over the years. But I'm doing too much talking.
No, that's good.
No,
that
that's
was
good.
really adding value.
Yeah, that was good. I think he really said it all. Yeah.
That was really good. I think that was a good perspective there. And that's something that I wanted to hone in on something that you said. But
Well, I just think it's important, that, we don't lose sight of, who we are, in terms of what the word says we are. And no matter how many cultural changes take place, as believers, we can't lose sight of that. We have to keep that front and center. And I think that might be the failing of our culture.
Yes.
Is that we don't spend enough time making room for God in our lives.
Because God doesn't change, we do.
We're the ones who change, and we're the ones who walk away and mess it up. So if we just keep grounded and rooted in that word, then even when things go really wrong, or God forbid when someone is called home, there is still a peace there.
yeah.
Because you're rooted and grounded in the word, and that's my biggest advice, to a young man or a young woman, in a new marriage or even in a new relationship.
Yes.
So did that help you?
That's absolutely good. Yeah, absolutely did. And I think one of the things I would say is, I think in today's culture, they're strict on roles, right? Strict on responsibilities. Well, who does this and who does that? And I think you answer that very well, that whoever does it better. But I'll add to it that sometimes you may need to shift as needed. right? Because life demands different things from you.
Right.
One may be sick and I have to step in and help a certain aspect, that type of thing, and being open to shift and however that shift may be. I think another aspect is we talked about how treating your partner as a plant, you fertilize them, right? Well, if you're not fertilizing, that you can play a role in it dying. You can play a role you can play a role in it, being brought back to life, right? Um, and so I think the thing is just being open and shifting as needed to whatever's happening in that particular era of your marriage. I think another aspect is the commitment level, right? Commitment can be. I don't really know if we understand that aspect of commitment, and I want you to kind of talk about that from perspective to Christ, right? Do I need to form it in a question, or you got it?
So commitment really is really seeking God first in His kingdom, and so what that looks like is that, I'm my husband's keeper. I'm there for him. We support each other. We love each other. We care about each other. The things that concerns him concerns me. I'm pretty much his hand and feet. So what that means is that I'm there when he needs me, and I'm committed to that relationship. And in my time, in my energy, in my emotion, in my love for him. And so that's what that looks like to me. As we talked about the different roles, and my commitment is that when in my particular role, he doesn't have to remind me of my role or what I should be doing, because I'm committed to him and I'm committed to the marriage. So I'm doing the things that I need to do in those roles. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I think, we talked about, marriage being a covenant. And I'll put it this way. Marriage is a contract. Okay. So, when we signed the contract, we didn't sign it with a clause that said, well, if you don't like it, you can get out in 3 years. Or if you see someone that you like better, you can get out and go get that person. We decided, that we were going to get married and we were going to stay married, and, do I make my wife happy all the time? No. Does she make me happy all the time? No. But we know that, we can rely on each other. We can depend on each other. We can count on certain things being done, regardless of whether I'm upset or she's upset. Our focus, is on that covenant, that contract. We're not going to, look for a side door, to go out of. We're not going to, try and, shirk our responsibilities. Those are not options for us. And that's the mindset, that you gain when you put Christ at the center of your life,
Yes.
And the thing about it is, the culture is going to tell you, well, if you're not getting what you want at home, go out there and get it, but that's just inviting all kinds of havoc in your life, and that would be the thing that I would caution against, all it's going to do is tear up people's lives,
Yes.
and you bring people into, your mess, then they're going to get messy, just keep your arguments, your disagreements, and, confined to
To the marriage.
to the
relationship.
marriage.
And the relationship.
And there are times when there needs to be someone to to counsel. There's nothing wrong with getting good godly counsel. And that can help, because sometimes you come to an impasse. You just can't
Break through.
You can't break through. So but nevertheless, the more you build your relationship, with Christ, the less you come to those stumbling blocks.
There was a conversation that we had, just in personal conversation I wanted to kind of mention in here, is that part of marriage is, like you said, we talked about the commitment level, and you talked about staying committed even through frustration, because we do live in an era where, it's all about my happiness. It's all about, me being my self-care, all that stuff, and nothing wrong with self-care and stuff like that. Take care of yourself. But it's the commitment level of choosing to stay together, right? One of the things I like that you mentioned was, even when conflict happens, is making sure that you kind of keep that in the confines of your relationship unless a third party is necessary. I think that was very good advice, especially because once people are invited in, one thing that you'll see is, while things may have changed, or your perspective on your mate have changed, their perspective has not, and they're still
They're looking at you like you're
like you crazy.
some
Why are you
monster.
still with that person?
Right, right.
Why are you still invested in this? And they did blah blah blah. And I think part of the commitment level is, marriage is between a man and a woman, and whatever relationship, whatever things that have happened in that relationship, that is their choice. It is not the world's choice, or them to persecute you based on your decision. If you're choosing to be committed to that person, despite what despite the challenges, that is your choice, right? But I thought that was really good and how you all answered that. So let me ask you this. What is a memorable moment or story that you felt like defined your marriage?
I don't know. This might go down the right road, but when your sister was born, we're in a hospital room, and she's lying up there out of it, and I'm next to her watching, and I'll be honest, I wasn't praying then, I was, when we were fresh into our marriage, and I didn't have that relationship. So, I'm just sitting there just trying to, man up and just make sure I'm watching the doctors and make sure everybody's doing their jobs. If I need to hit somebody, you know what I'm saying? I was just trying to handle it.
Yeah.
But what that did for me was made me understand that, there is so much that's out of my control, and it actually led me, to developing a relationship with God, so that I could be strong in those times, so that I would know what to do when I really didn't know what to do, even though I was pretending like, I had it all under control. That basically defined, my role, for me as the husband and father, and it began to define it. I knew that I had to get help, and I couldn't get help from folks around me because they were all messed up. I mean, the only place I could get help was from the only one who could really help you, and that was the beginnings of my relationship with Christ. And from there it just got better. I went through that same scenario 2 more times. And each time, once I finally got to you, I was praying, and, I knew God had it, and, it was less worry and all that. So,
I was a special child.
Sure, you were a special child. Your sister would say she's the original
I'm
crew.
sure she would, but the Lord prepared. So he had to go through trials before he could get to the blessing. God,
Thank you,
hallelujah.
Jesus. Yeah.
So I do want to touch on, these are 2 last questions, and I feel like this really added value to the lives of the people who are tuned in. But I want to talk on one other item because we do have a large audience that are entrepreneurs, and I know your story. I know, and you can kind of share your story as much as you want. When you did launch your business, right? And a lot of marriages don't survive that. They don't survive the launching of something and the balance that goes when you are used to whether you had a 9 to 5 or however, and you're transitioning to something that is full time. Let's talk about that and be as honest as possible in those moments because couples don't necessarily survive that.
Let me start
Go
off. So
ahead. Yeah.
so it was a scary moment.
Yeah.
It really was. It was a scary moment because we're transitioning into the unknown, and so you have all these thoughts about is this really gonna work, and but I had a full-time job, and we decided we talked about it together, and we decided to trust God with it. And so, even in the initial first, I guess, couple years, the finances was not coming in as we would like to have come in, but we still trusted God. And so, and I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it from here.
Well, and we got to fast forward from the beginning of our relationship and our marriage life, because by this time, we had gained a lot more knowledge into, what God expects of us, and our relationship with God had matured to a certain level, and we had seen God bless us because of our tithes, because of our over and above giving, and all the things that we did in the kingdom, whether it was street witnessing, all the things that you do as church folks, those things built, us in our faith level, and by that time, I mean, I was ready, she wasn't ready, but, I knew God had it, he had shown us how to invest in real estate. And he got us moving down a certain pathway. And prior to me starting this business, prior to us starting this business, 3 years before I'd received this promotion on my job, and it was a good promotion, and by faith, we decided, that whatever over and above that I was making before I got the promotion, we were going to set that aside. Of course we tithe on it and all that, but it went straight into an account, and that helped us, it prepared us for this move, so I was confident, but it was scary. It was scary, and, although I knew that I could do what it is that we decided, that I was going to be doing, it was all new to me, and when that happens, it's a little scary. So I lost my train of thought.
No, that's good. I mean, yeah.
Your question again, though?
Well, it was more just, for those entrepreneurs who, are married, like that challenge, just kind of talking about that. And you did, you spoke to it.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's I guess, I think more than anything, we had made room for God in our lives, and our faith was such that, we were ready to step out. We didn't feel confident, but we were ready, and he didn't disappoint. God didn't disappoint, even though it took some years for, my business to get to a point where it was adding to our, our income. He showed us other things that we could do, and investing here and there, so it all kind of worked out, and that's the thing, you have to stay, I think I said this before, as it relates to the relationship with God, as it relates to the marriage and the relationship, you got to be bought into it. You don't get in it and then, look to get out of it quickly. Get in it into whatever it is and stick with it and through faith and hard work,
And trust God for
and
it.
trusting, it'll work out.
That was a good response and a good answer there. I think it's just like we talked about commitment to marriage, commitment to God, but it's also commitment to the assignment. And business is an assignment. We talk about this on on our podcast about how business is a ministry assignment for the marketplace, whether you realize it or not. It's an opportunity for you to go and meet and and sit with people that you normally would never ever sit with, meet with, and even share the gospel with, right? And so I wanted them to kind of share that story because I understand that during those times of business when things may be slow or things may not be progressing the way you anticipated, there still has to be a level of commitment to each other, commitment to what God has assigned for you to do, and also a commitment to your faith that I'm going to believe God despite what I see, despite what that month may look like. We understand that there's a progression to our faith, there's a progression to our thought life, that it must align with the word, and our faith must align with what the word says.
Amen.
And so our last question is this, and we'll be ending this podcast. What legacy do you hope for your marriage, leaves for your family, and even just onlookers, those who are maybe been inspired over the years? What do you hope that legacy leaves? And what does that legacy look like?
A legacy that that if we keep God in the midst of our marriages and we keep our covenant, our contract, that there will be no lack in our lives. Just being committed to each other, letting people see the realness of marriage. If I had to, what I want to say here is, I wished I could say that everything in a marriage works perfectly, but it doesn't. Everything doesn't work perfectly. But as we, I want people to see us as, people that walk together as one, as unity, as love, as, as committed to the things of God, as not giving up, as building each other up, as, just being an example of strength and just staying with it, that being able just to stay with it no matter what. Even though the hard times may come, the winds may blow or whatever, but we're still committed to this marriage and we're committed to each other. And I just want people to see the true love that even though you stay married for, here we are 42 years, but we're still just as in love with each other as we were when we were 23 and 24 years of age. So
That's really good.
I don't get to answer.
Oh, I thought, go ahead. That's fair.
Okay. All right. Well, my legacy, the legacy that I want to leave, is three strong families. Families that stay together, pray together, grow together, and allow their children to thrive. That was our goal. Our goal was, to provide an environment, for, each of our children. I get a little emotional when I think about this. Each of our children to thrive, and that's what I want for my daughter, my oldest son, and for you. That's the legacy that I want to leave. I want you all to see, that, though I have my many faults, I stand firm, on the foundation of marriage. Though I've made many mistakes, those mistakes did not push me away from my relationship with my wife, or take me away from my relationship with my wife, or take me out of the covenant with my wife and the covenant of marriage, and that there's hope, even though the world tells you different,
Yes.
there is hope. And as long as you're steadfast and as long as you're in relationship with God, that legacy will live on.
Can't stress it enough. We need
Mhm.
God
Yeah.
for the steadfastness of the relationship.
One thing I want to do, this will be the last thing. So, this has been a great episode thus far, of really just taking these nuggets in of how to have a lasting marriage. And really, it's not some secret sauce. It's just hard work. It's patience. It's forgiveness. It's
Yeah.
commitment. It's choosing one another, right? But one of the things that I want you all to do is to address a male, like a young male, you address a female, and I want you to just share with them, as if, maybe you could speak to it as if it's your younger self. And I want you to encourage that younger male and that younger female, real briefly, doesn't have to be long, and this will be our last thing, and we'll be ending this episode.
Encourage them.
From a older woman to a younger woman, from an older male to a younger male.
Okay. Well, to the young female, as my husband mentioned earlier, is that the world offers so much, so much glamour. We get into, vain glory, vain beauty. It's just so much distractions in the world. But truly, the beauty is found on the inside. And that beauty can only be found with that relationship with God. And as as you seek him, the word says, if you draw to him, he'll draw close to you. So as you seek him and, for the things that you need in life, he'll begin to change that things that we so care for most on the outside to the inside. And you'll find that this is where you're going to find your joy, your peace, and your happiness. It is not found outside of you, but only as God began to change you and to change you through the word of God. And that's where your joy and happiness is found at.
Speaking to my younger self, or someone like my younger self, whether it's, most importantly, your relationship with God, your relationship with your wife or family, or whether it's your business. Speaking on terms of your relationship with God, you're going to ask God for things, and God is not going to give it to you right away, and that's going to create a reaction from you as it relates to your relationship with God. When it comes to your wife, and your marriage, the same thing is going to happen. You're going to want some things from that relationship. You're going to want her to treat you a certain kind of way. There are things that you want from her that she's just not going to give you, and the marriage is not going to give you. And the same holds true for your business. You're going to want that big payday to come quickly. It might not come. What you have to do every single day is get up, and choose God. I choose you, God. Choose your wife every single day over all others. Choose your marriage, and choose to stay in that job, in that on that career. You know, I'm retired now, so it's hard for me to really, I've been retired for a few years, so it's hard for me to really focus in on the job part of it, although I'm still working. But you have to choose every single day, no matter how mad you get, no matter how hard it is. You know, I would tell my younger self to wake up every day, choose God, you know, choose my wife, choose my marriage, choose this career that I chose at some point, and just keep doing it over and over again. You know, no matter how many times you feel like it lets you down or fails you, you know, you have to make that choice. And before you know it, you know, you'll be retired, you know, looking back on, you know, how God has brought you through all those things, you know, and you're still there. So
That was really good advice. So remember to choose the things that are valuable. And it's not about business, about money, but the things that really matter the most. And so I hope you enjoyed this episode of Live the Grace Life. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this broadcast with someone that you feel it would add value to their life. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next episode.